Waiting. Way live?
Oh, there it is.
I don't believe it. It's deceptive, Ned. You
Well,
can't believe it.
we're going to get started as if it were live, whether it's deceiving us or not. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 35 of the TechForge podcast. I am your host, Dynamo Ned, and I am joined by my ever faithful co-host, Mr. Jason.
Namaste.
Our friend and other faithful co-host Hunter wanted to be with us this evening, but unfortunately, when we're recording this, where he is living is currently under a tornado watch. So he decided it would be in his best interest to find a nice, safe place to barricade himself until the warning passes.
I wonder if he's calling himself Dorothy on the inside.
I wouldn't begin to know.
Me either.
Oh, but we do have some interesting tech news for this week. So we've got new and interesting hard drive technologies. Yes, you can innovate with hard drives in 2019.
No.
We have more leaks regarding AMD's Navi and its potential launch in the middle of this year. We have releases of new cases, in particular the Corsair Crystal 680X. We have Google, Intel, and Microsoft sending mixed signals about Windows 7 and Windows 10. And perhaps most importantly, NVIDIA released a new graphics card on us literally the day we're recording this. It'll be yesterday by the time most of you watch this. But the new GTX 1660, the non-TI version, released today. And there's actually a few for sale. And we'll be featuring one in one of our deals this week.
Sweet.
So let's get started. We'll start off with that interesting hard drive technology. Now, I've been following Seagate's developments in the hard drive space for a while. I remember when, way back in 2015, when they first talked about implementing their HAMR, or heat-assisted magnetic recording technology.
Hammer.
And so now they've come up with a new system that they call Mach 2.
Multi-actuator. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's multi-actuator technology, so that instead of having a single actuator for the arms in the hard drive, they have multiple actuators for the drive heads, so that instead of having to move them all at the same time, they can move individual heads as necessary, thus speeding up read and write and seek speeds, at least in theory. So our first article, this comes from the Seagate blog, where they discuss the technology and their debut of it. And of course, we'll have links to all these articles we're discussing in the comments down below and in the description for this video. And so, for those of you who are not familiar, HAMR and Mach are two of Seagate's technologies for improving hard drive endurance and reliability. Of course, we already mentioned HAMR, H-A-M-R, stands for Heat-Assisted Magnetic Recording. It essentially uses a small laser to heat up the sector before recording or writing the data to it to help ensure that you can write smaller portions of the drive and thus fit more sectors on a particular platter.
Yeah, I think both technologies look really interesting. I think the HAMR tech using the laser is kind of a twofold development or innovation, where it's helping with data density to increase data density, but also reliability. So that looks pretty interesting.
And of course, multi-actuator, like we said, enables the read and write heads to be on multiple actuators, so that you, instead of having to move all the arms at once on a single actuator, you can move each arm or sets of arms individually.
Ned, I'm getting dizzy watching the two hammers. I'm getting dizzy watching the actuators go.
Yeah, why don't we let our audience take a look at that?
Oh my gosh. This has got to be the coolest thing I've ever seen on a hard drive. I could watch this all day long. I'm serious. Like, I could watch this all day.
So it's a little choppy in the GIF, but you can see how the individual arms are actuating across the platters in the demonstration drive. It's actually a pretty fascinating technology. So that's the Mach 2 or the multi-actuator technology in action. Pretty impressive, in my opinion.
See, so what you got to do, Ned, go back over to the page. What you got to do is you've got to record that and put it on a loop, on like an endless loop, and play We're Kung Fu fighting in the background. Yeah, that's it right there.
So this is the hammer technology. So you can see it's using just a little laser there to hit the drive to temporarily heat up the sector of the drive it's trying to read. And that allows it to use a denser, or to have a greater data density.
So they're stating a demonstrated metric of 480 megabytes per second, which would make it 60. They're saying 60% faster than a 15K RPM hard drive.
Exactly.
480. That's low end SATA SSD speed.
Right. 480 megabytes per second. It, like you said, is low end SATA SSD speeds for reads and writes.
That's crazy.
And I mean, considering that's your average hard drive, the hard drive in my machine on a good day will hit 200 megabytes per second.
Yeah.
And it's a 7200 RPM Seagate 2 terabyte drive.
Yeah. Well, you've got a fast one, dude, because I've got a 5400 RPM Toshiba, little 2.5 incher. I don't know what that thing benchmarks at, but I'd be surprised if it was 100 megabytes.
You're probably right. If it's a 5400 RPM, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cheap data drive, right? I got it for $40. I was like, yeah, it's 2.5 inch. Man, I'll get it for a game driver and archival.
Right.
And it's fine.
For data storage, 5400 RPM is fine. It's just, if you're going to be using the drive for anything other than bulk, like media storage, then yeah, I would get 7200 RPM, but that's just me.
Yeah, I had Anthem on it, but then I didn't like how Anthem was loading really slow, so then I had to transfer it off.
Well, in all fairness, I played Anthem in the alpha and the beta. I had it installed to an SSD, and it still took forever to load.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about that game. Anyway, we could go on and on about that.
Oh yeah, and there's several people I know who have PS4s that wound up as bricks because of that game, but that's a completely different issue for another time.
Oh, that bites. That's expensive.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, EA is not the only one with woes. Intel is continuing to experience shortages in its CPU inventory because it simply cannot meet demand. Its current 14 nanometer processes are largely tapped out. And due to this, this article is from TechSpot. Intel CPU shortages to worsen in the second quarter of 2019. Intel could end up skipping over 10 nanometer entirely and diving straight into 7 nanometer development.
That's because they're still having issues, which they haven't been very transparent about. Interesting. They'll eventually claw themselves out of this process defect mess, but man, it's very surprising Intel is usually very reliable when it comes to, our updates on their architecture and making sure that they have enough supply. It's really surprising to me that they've been having all of these issues with delivering architectural updates and I don't know. It's just really surprising they've not been reliable at all. And AMD has been right there,
Mm-hmm. And they have definitely been exploiting it.
Oh yeah.
Digitimes is the one who originally noted this, by the way. They noted that originally it was thought that the shortages that started in August of last year would be resolved in Q4 due to vendors prepping their inventories for year-end sales. Unfortunately, that didn't really happen because the supply gap has largely remained static. And in fact, in certain areas, it's actually grown, in particular in the low end of the market, with CPUs designed for Chromebooks and other low end PCs. Demand for Chromebooks apparently has caused an increase in the supply gap by 1 to 2 percentage points, particularly in the low end.
Ah,
Because Intel, in an attempt to be able to maximize their earnings from their limited supply, focused much of their inventory or much of their production capacity on their high-end, high-margin desktop chips, like the 9900K, the 9700K, et
mm-hmm.
cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, that means at the low end, they're experiencing a bit of a shortage. And this can actually be seen if we look at AMD's notebook shipment share, which the second article on this actually goes into more detail. But basically, AMD's laptop market share went from 9.8% of worldwide worldwide notebook shipment
Mm-hmm.
to 15.8% by
That's
the
a
first
pretty
quarter of this year.
that's a pretty big jump in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's a 6% jump in only a year from Q1 2018 to Q1 2019.
Mm-hmm.
To have an 6% increase in share is quite impressive.
And they're just now rolling out an update on their
Mhm.
notebook parts, which so far looks pretty good.
And
So,
and considering they just came out with the new Ryzen 3350H equipped notebooks, in
mhm.
particular in the Asus FX505 that we talked about a few times before, coupled with an RX 560 at roughly a $700 price point.
It's not bad.
I mean, for a budget gaming laptop, that's right up there with the 8250U equipped with an MX 150. In fact, I was watching a video from Austin Evans today
Mhm.
where he took a look at the Acer Nitro 5, which is equipped with the same RX 560, but the older R5 2500U. And in graphics benchmarks like Firestrike and TimeSpy, the Acer Nitro 5 equipped with the Ryzen 5 2500U and the RX 560 actually edges out the GTX 1050 Ti version of that laptop.
That's impressive. But a gaming laptop, I don't know, $700.
Well,
At the end of the day, if you're looking for an 8-threaded laptop, you'd be hard. I mean, those Ryzen parts are extremely competitive,
yeah,
especially if you can get it decently equipped. So
yeah,
you
the
can't go
Ryzen 5
wrong.
2500U fights tooth and nail with the Core i5 8250U. So,
Well, is
and
the
they're both
8250 hyper-threaded?
it is hyper threaded. It's
Interesting. Okay.
The 8th gen was the first time that the i5s were quad cores in the mobile space.
Hmm.
That's when they moved the i7s up to being hexacores in the mobile space with the 8750H.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's kind of funny how the Core i5-8250U performs similarly to my Core i7-4702MQ from 4 years previous, only about, I think it's about 15% faster.
That's not much of a performance gap, considering the time frame.
Well, considering the difference is that the 8250U, I believe, is a 15-watt part, and mine's a 45-watt part.
Okay. Enough said. Yeah, okay. That makes a big difference.
Yeah. So although they didn't crank the clocks very much between those generations, they did get some impressive efficiency gains.
Yeah, they did.
And Haswell was no slouch when it came to efficiency anyway.
No, it wasn't. It was a really good architecture at the time. Still is, actually.
Yeah, for a 5-year-old architecture, it's getting along pretty well.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't mind having one of these Ryzen laptops, though.
Yeah, I've been looking at those myself because, admittedly, my 17-inch Haswell-equipped notebook, its weakness is its GT750M, which was an excellent budget GPU at the time, and I bought the laptop at the time to be a workstation that I could occasionally game on. And for that purpose, it did quite well.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy a laptop to game. As long as the graphics were good enough to, push movies to a TV or something.
Well, also consider at the time, I was working with a 6-year-old desktop. Was my only other computer, so I had to make do with what I had.
I completely understand.
But yeah, for what I paid for it, it has done quite well for me, and it's received about every upgrade I can give it. It got upgraded from 8 gigs to 16 gigabytes of RAM. The original 1 terabyte hard drive got swapped out for a 500 gigabyte SSD.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put the 1 terabyte hard drive as mass storage in the second hard drive bay.
Nice.
About the only thing it could still be upgraded would be if I could swap the GT750M with the, at the time, that laptop, you could have upgraded it to the 770M, I believe. But sadly, you can't find those anymore. Oh, well.
That's too bad. So
Anyway,
what's next? Is it the Navi?
Yes. So speaking of upgrades, we'll talk about it a little bit later in the show about NVIDIA releasing their GTX 1660 and 1660 Ti, which have really put a hurt on AMD in the mid-range because it's the first GPU in quite some time from NVIDIA that actually provides a similar value proposition to the RX 570 and 580.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that AMD is not looking to launch 7 nanometer Navi until after Ryzen 3000 releases, well, that does give NVIDIA quite some time with basic free reign on the market. So this comes from WCCF Tech, so obviously take with a grain of salt. Any kind of exclusive leak like this, take with your preferred measure of salt. But according to their sources, 7 nanometer Navi is scheduled to release mid Q3, exactly 1 month after 7 nanometer Ryzen.
So what does that put it at? August time frame?
More or less, they're estimating it would likely release at Gamescom. which would make sense because the only other event around that time period would be SIGGRAPH. And given that this is a gaming GPU, SIGGRAPH wouldn't make a lot of sense.
Okay.
There was the earlier,
there
were the earlier ones. There was the earlier rumors about releasing on 7/7. Only problem with that is July the 7th is a Sunday.
Yeah. Well, that's probably going to be good because that'll be back to school sales, and I mean, so if Gamescom is going to be when it releases, that's looking to be Wednesday, August 21st, 2019 to August 24th. So it'd be a little late for the back to school sales, but they could catch the tail end of it.
Of course, what we do know about Navi at this point is that it's going to be the first non-GCN or Graphics Core Next architecture since the 7970.
No.
The Radeon HD 7000 series, of course, introduced the Graphics Core Next architecture way back in 2011, if I remember correctly.
That's interesting that they're going away from GCN.
Well, in particular, they're wanting to break free of one of the limits of the GCN macro architecture, which is a hard top limit of 4096 stream processors.
Which they hit with Vega 64, with, what was it, the 290X?
Yes.
Something like that,
So yeah, they're wanting to avoid that hard cap on stream processors that is imposed by GCN. Now, admittedly, up to this point, there hasn't really been a need to go past 4096 with the Fury X and, Vega 64.
Mm-hmm.
But as we can see, admittedly with Vega and Radeon 7 both kind of hitting the top end of what's capable with that architecture, it may be time. It looks like it is finally time for AMD to move on.
Right.
And speaking of Navi, Hot Hardware found a leak of some alleged Navi benchmarks. Now, this is not for the top-end Navi chip. This was for a Navi, or supposed Navi GPU with 20 CUs and 1,280 stream processing units.
Interesting. I wonder what kind of performance it's supposed to have.
Well, according to this particular benchmark, which, let's see, where did they say it came from? It came from
Ruins.
They say it's a CompuBench benchmark. So they compare this version of Navi to an RX 580X, which is I believe is the mobile variant of the RX 580. Or it may be, regardless. Let's take a look at these. So we can see here that they're running the AMD 66AF:(F1, and they compare it to the RX 580X. Notice that in this particular text, what they call their Aztec Ruins test, it achieves 97.3 FPS versus the RX 580's 75 FPS. And is able to process 368 frames per second versus the RX 580's 255.
So that's about a 30% improvement.
But what's even more interesting is when we look at the high tier version, where it's able to produce 177 frames per second on screen versus 49.9 by the RX 580.
Wonder what that means, actually.
It's a good question because unfortunately we don't really know yet.
Yeah.
But they also compare it in the compute part of the benchmark to RX Vega in a compute workload. And the numbers are not that different. In
Well,
particular with the ocean surface simulation test,
you have to
indicating that it might be better at tessellation.
you have to take that with a grain of salt because Vega is a pure compute card.
Exactly.
And so when you're looking at comparisons across architectures, when you look at Vega versus Pascal or Turing, Vega stomps Turing and Pascal usually in compute, but when it comes to gaming performance, they're totally different. You know, Vega can hold its own with similar cards in its performance tier, but I mean it's very much a compute card. So, and all of the GeForce cards they're all gaming cards, right? So
That can compute.
yeah, yeah. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. What I'm getting from these numbers is that Navi is going to be pretty much designed from the ground up as a gaming card first. So I'm okay with that. That's the way it kind of should be.
Yeah, it really should be. I mean, that's the approach they took with Polaris. And we can see how well that worked out for them over the
Yeah.
last 3 years.
Yeah. Polaris was fast. It was power efficient at the time. And it was a good architecture. But unfortunately, with Navi delays, it should have been out in 2018, you know. It's kind of their own fault, honestly.
In a lot of ways, you're right, unfortunately. AMD does have a bit of a history of shooting its own self in the foot, unfortunately.
Well, Radeon Technology Group, at least recently.
Yes.
So, yeah. But it is what it is. Hopefully, they'll come out with Navi, and hopefully, it'll be a market, a market changer like Ryzen was. We'll wait and see.
Yep, we'll wait and see. All right. Jason, you originally suggested this next article, so I'll let you take the lead on it because I know you have been case shopping of recently.
Yeah. Well, I want to add another radiator to my build because I really want to unleash Vega. I don't like how hot it gets. So my current build is I've got 480 millimeters of radiator, and I've got a lightly overclocked 2700X and a heavily modded Vega 56. And I absolutely love that Vega. But while it can cool it just fine, I don't like how hot the system gets. So I've been looking at alternatives, and I want another 360 millimeters of radiator. Well, to do that, I need a different case because I have a Mesh 5C, and it's pretty much packed as full as it can ever get. And so I've been doing a lot of case shopping, and I noticed that Corsair had released a new cube case called the Crystal Series 680X. And I just kind of happened across this review, and it looks interesting. It's a great looking case. So it's a dual compartment case, meaning one compartment housing the actual components, the core components of your system, as in motherboard and everything that can connect to it, motherboard, video card. The secondary components, the supporting components like the power supply, I/O drive, stuff like that, actually sit in a compartment behind it. Now, there's been a number of cases like this that have done pretty well. PC11 Dynamic being one. And then there's a number of other cube cases. I think Thermaltake has a couple. But What really looked interesting about this particular one was just the overall layout. Now it's a bit wider than some of the other dual compartment cases out there. It's well built. It's got decent airflow. It can house a number of fans. In the case, you get, I want to say, 4 SP fans stock with the case, which is good. But there's a couple of downsides to this. For one, it's extremely expensive. I think it's more expensive than really what it should be, considering some of the other negatives to the case. So it's got decent water cooling support. You can fit a 360 up to a 360 millimeter radiator in the front, 120 in the or 120 or 140 in the back, and a 240 at the top. The problem with that is that at its price point, I want to, what was it, 250?
It's one. It's 249.
Okay. So at that price point, it's competing with cases that have far greater water cooling support. So while, if you were to actually put a 360 and a 240 and a 120 in it, you're really not going to run into any issues cooling anything, right? But another limitation to this case is dust filtering. So to properly maintain this case, you have to take it partially apart just to get the front filter out. And the top filter is kind of in the same boat. You have to take the top partially apart. And if you have a water cooling build with soft tubing, you're probably okay. But if you have hard tubing, this can make, dust cleaning very challenging. And so that's a major downside, I think, especially when you're looking at the price point. But the good thing is that it's the actual compartment that houses the motherboard is very deep, and you can fit. I'm not sure how deep it goes, but you can fit almost any kind of tower cooler in there that you can think of. So that's good, and it's got good airflow, like I said. But when you're looking at other cases that are less than half the price of this one, namely the PCO11 Dynamic, which has better water cooling support, and when it comes to maintaining the case, cleaning the case, it's extremely easy. It's very easy to get to those dust filters that they have in that Lee & Lee case. For example, the bottom filter pulls out from the side. The front and top filters are easy to get to on the Dynamic Air. The PC11 Dynamic doesn't have a front, any sort of front mounting, but the side mount has a magnetic filter, which you can place on the outside of the case. It's super easy. I mean, in 10 minutes, you're done cleaning your case. So, and then if you look at Fractal Design's offerings, they're probably even easier because the filter for the bottom of the case pulls out from just beneath the front, and you can easily clean and put it back in. The R6 has a door that you open and then you pop out the filter. How easy is that? The Meshify C, the Meshify S2, all you have to do is you pull out the bottom filter and then you reach underneath and then push up, and the entire front comes off. And that's a big mesh foam filter. So, and those are cases that are half, right around half the price of this one. So,
right
at this price point, if it was $150, we would easily be having a different conversation about it.
And that goes back to something I've said before. There are not bad products, there are bad prices. Now, someone could argue, well, yeah, there's garbage products out there. Well, yes, they are. But even garbage products have a price where they become viable or useful. It's just generally a very, very low one.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The
The
Walmart computer, for example.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into great lengths about this case. It's built well and it's got really nice features, but at its price, you just nah. Move on unless you really like the aesthetic.
were you wanting to also talk about the H500 as well, or?
Yeah, we could. I mean, it came out in July, so that's kind of my bad. While I was case shopping, I happened upon the H500.
But it
Um,
is a good example of another case that's in a significantly lower price bracket that offers better options than the 680X.
oh yeah, it offers far greater options. But it's not a cube case, right? So it's more of a large mid tower, which is kind of on the border between mid and full tower, but it's a 500 in every shape of the word. I mean, you get the two front 200 millimeter fans. It's got great options for I/O, cable management, and it fixed a lot of issues that were on the initial H500P because the front is completely mesh. The airflow is fantastic. The only really the only difference beyond some aesthetics is water cooling support. So in the $150 variant, the H500P mesh, the top of the case has a rail that would allow you to install a 360 millimeter radiator. And this one, you can install a 240 up on the top. That's about the biggest difference. Other than that, it's a fantastic case. It's $100.
Yeah, and that really illustrates the difference. At $100, it's literally less than half the price and offers, in general, better options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an extremely solid case at that price point. It's very competitive. So yeah, I mean, we don't have to go into great lengths about it, but I thought it was pretty cool.
Okay, let's see. Ah, yes. So normally this is a PC hardware show, and so we don't normally discuss software that much. But obviously, we look at PC hardware from the aspect of an enthusiast, and the hardware doesn't mean that much without the software to run on it.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, one of the things that can be the biggest sources of joy or pain when it comes to running your PC is the operating system. Now, for most of us who game, that means we run Windows, whether it's Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, or if you're even one of those lonely Windows XP or Windows Vista holdouts, we all typically run some version of Windows. Now, I've been experimenting of late with running systems on Linux and seeing how well they game. Spoilers on that, they do a lot better than they used to.
Well, you can thank Steam for that.
Yeah, by and large. But it's not without some controversy with Windows. We've talked about in the past how Microsoft has this really, really far-fetched policy of if you choose to press the update button at the wrong part of the month, you will get beta updates. And they don't tell you this.
Yeah,
And
they really should. That's horrible practice.
And now, apparently, I didn't include it in the show because, well, we had enough examples of mixed messaging anyway. Now, apparently, to correct this problem, Microsoft isn't going to allow greater user control. Instead, they're going to include a checker that checks to make sure whether your system will boot or not when an update is downloaded. And if it doesn't, it will revert it automatically. which I guess is great for people who don't understand updating their PC, but is kind of a pain for those of us who want more user control about which updates we get.
Yeah.
Because it already is, you're going to download updates and you don't get to choose when, unless you get Windows 10 Pro, and then you can only choose to delay updates by up to a year.
Which, unless you know where to get Windows keys, that's what, $150 OEM?
Right.
Man, that is just not good customer service.
But anyway, as you know, Windows 7 in particular is a 10-year-old operating system at this point. And Microsoft has already said that they are going to be end-of-lifing Windows 7 in 2020.
Wonder why people are holding on to it.
Well,
Windows 7 will never
they
die.
held on to Windows XP.
Yeah, that's true. Windows XP came out in what, 2003?
Mm-hmm. And they held on to it till they finally quit support in 2014.
That's hilarious. 11 years.
And so Microsoft has been trying to encourage those who are on Windows 7 to upgrade to Windows 10. But then they do something like this, where this is from Ars Technica. Microsoft brings some of DirectX 12 to Windows 7 to boost World of Warcraft multi-threading performance.
Well, they did get a pretty major update recently.
And apparently there's going to be a few other games that are receiving a similar treatment on Windows 7.
That's good.
So it's really interesting to me, because the big selling point about upgrading to Windows 10 is supposed to be you get DirectX 12 support.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're going to start bringing parts of DirectX 12 to Windows 7, an operating system they're supposed to be sunsetting in about a year, why?
Maybe to make games more compatible and run better, but honestly, I think for those of us that are enthusiasts or have bought newer computers in the last couple of years, I mean, they've already got a decent install base on Windows 10 now. So,
I mean, this is true.
I don't know why.
And so
I don't know why. I mean, it's hard to even get driver support in a lot of cases for Windows 7 now.
yeah, it's but there is a Microsoft did do a developer blog in particular about this particular implementation they did with Blizzard for World of Warcraft Battle of Azeroth, or Battle for Azeroth. And they talked about, in particular, Game Patch 8.1.5 to use DirectX 12 on Windows 7, which apparently provides a significant frame rate boost in the game and improves multi-threading performance. So they do make sure at the end of the article, though, to say, how are DirectX 12 games different from between Windows 10 and Windows 7? Windows 10 has critical OS improvements that make modern low-level graphics APIs, including DirectX 12, run more efficiently. If you enjoy your favorite games running with DirectX 12 on Windows 7, you should check out those games run even better on Windows 10. Unless Windows 10 auto-updates with one of those game-crippling updates that cripples game performance like it did last week. So, yeah. Meanwhile, Microsoft, in a wonderful bit of mixed messaging, because let's face it, that's all Microsoft does is mixed messaging, is starting to send nagging notifications to people on Windows 7 to upgrade to Windows 10.
That's bullying.
In a different Windows blog post, they said, quote, beginning next month, if you are a Windows 7 customer, you can expect to see a notification appear on your Windows 7 PC. It is a courtesy reminder that you can expect to see a handful of times in 2019. So basically, this is a notification to let you know that, hey, support for Windows 7 is ending in 2020. You should upgrade to Windows 10.
So if you're still running Windows 7, I'm sorry. But if you're still running Windows 7, chances are you're running older hardware. I wonder how many of those people will just throw their arms up and say, well, fine, I'll format my hard drive and I'll put Linux on it instead.
You know, I've tried it on a number of PCs. Right now, it has Windows 10 installed on it because I was using it for the Anthem beta. But my 2600K machine, it's had a number of different hardware configurations, but I've tried it on multiple Linux distros, and let me tell you, it runs butter smooth on most of the Ubuntu distros.
Yep.
Linux Mint, or Ubuntu based, I should say. Linux Mint, it does lovely on. Base Ubuntu 18.04 is a treat to use. I've even tried Debian and Fedora. Steam support on Fedora is a little weird.
Is it?
But otherwise, Fedora does really well. And of course, Debian works on everything. So
yeah, I'm kind of a fan of Linux Mint, honestly. My parents have a number of systems, and they're older, but I've got Linux Mint installed on all of them, except for my mom has a newer laptop, which has Windows 10 on it. But for the most part, yeah, my parents are completely converted to Linux. So
I mean, I have a little laptop. It's a little 12-inch laptop that I use that I call my TV Buddy. And TV Buddy runs Linux Mint 19. So
nice.
And TV Buddy exists solely so that I can browse the web and occasionally, play a low-impact game like Magic the Gathering Arena or Hearthstone or something along those lines while I'm watching TV.
Are those browser-based games or
no? And that's the interesting thing, is they are Windows games that technically do not have Linux clients. However, there's a nice little program called Lutris.
Yep.
And it will create basically Windows sandboxes where the games can run in. And running under that, it does quite well.
It's like a friendlier version of Wine, I think, isn't it?
Pretty much. It's just that with Lutris, they basically crowdsource the configuration files to make sure that they work across a wide span of systems.
Nice.
Now, I mean, TV Buddy is an older laptop. It's an HP EliteBook 2570p.
I'm not familiar.
It's a 12-inch corporate laptop that I got when the company I worked for was getting rid of some older hardware. They gave me the opportunity to go through and test any of the machines that were there to see if they functioned. I did. This was one of the ones that did. And I'm glad I did, because all I had to do was buy 8 gigs of DDR3 1600 laptop RAM, install it in there.
Ivy Bridge?
That is correct. It has a Core i7 3520M, which is a dual-core hyper-threaded, but it runs at 2.7 to 3.6 gigahertz.
Nice.
And with a 240 gigabyte SSD and 8 gigs of DDR3 1600, it sings.
Yeah, that would be a very nice general productivity machine, honestly.
Yeah, like I said, it's my TV Buddy. It's what I usually write up the show notes for this show on. It's what I use for just general, playing around on the net, trying to research stuff.
Nice.
Basically, it lets me do all my play work, as I like to call it, while I'm sitting on my couch.
Nice.
And that's what it's for. So I haven't tested that machine under Windows 10. I ought to see what the performance difference really is between the two.
You know, with an SSD and 8 gigs of RAM, and even though it is an Ivy Bridge based processor, you still have 4 threads. It would do just fine on 10. It would do just fine.
I will say the only version of Linux that's given me any trouble on it is I tried Manjaro on it. And I also, because I'm a masochist, decided to do an install of Arch from scratch.
Brave man.
I installed it with the Mate desktop, and it generally worked. The only problem I had with it was that I could never get Wi-Fi to work properly. I had to use some rather hacky solutions with NDIS plus wrapper.
Did you ever get it working?
It worked. It's just it was never as reliable as it was on other Linux distros, which is why I ultimately went back to Ubuntu. And now all the Arch fanboys are going to come into the comments and be like, "You just didn't know what you were doing."
Yeah, but 8 times out of 10 on a system like that, you put Linux Mint on it or something that runs off of an Ubuntu repository. 8 times out of 10, it works okay, just fine.
I'd say probably more often than that.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's running Linux Mint 19, and it does lovely.
Fantastic. So when are we getting some GTX 1660, man?
You know what? That's fair. These other two stories are just kind of more of the same. Google saying you should upgrade to Windows 10 because they found critical flaws in the way Windows 7 handles Chrome. And ZD.net talking about how Intel warns that you need to download the latest driver on Windows 10 for their graphics because there was a severe driver flaw in the latest version, and that the current version in Windows does not patch for it. So Intel saying if you're on Windows 7, you're protected, but on Windows 10, you're not. So like I said, mixed signals all over the place.
That's really scary considering Intel is the dominant GPU maker right now.
Yeah, the Intel page talks about how there were 19 security flaws fixed in the most recent version of the driver. And that in particular, if you are using an Intel-based driver for graphics driver for Windows, you need to be looking for, let's see, version 10.18.x, 20.19.x, depending on which version or which graphics you're using, or 21.20.x or 24.20.100 to make sure that you have the most up-to-date that takes care of all these flaws. And again, we'll have a link to that article as well as a link to where you can download those graphics drivers in the description below.
Interesting.
So, now we get to the 1660.
Oh, really?
So, as you may be aware at this point, or you may not be, when we're recording this, the embargo on the GeForce GTX 1660, the non-TI version, lifted the morning before we recorded this video. So we originally were going to talk about some leaks about the 1660, but since it's already here, well, those leaks are now moot. So we've replaced them with a few reviews that we thought were quite insightful about the 1660. And spoilers, the 1660 is probably the first part from NVIDIA to really present a better value proposition in the mid-range than the RX 580 and RX 590. And even then, it's close.
Mm-hmm.
The GTX 1660, it provides significantly better performance than the RX 580 in most games and trades blows with the RX 590.
Mm-hmm.
And does so at a far lower power draw of only 120 watts.
Yep. So just for comparison's sake, the RX 590 typically consumes around 220 to 250 watts.
Right, under full load.
Yeah.
And so this first one here, this is from a non-tech. They reviewed the EVGA XC gaming model, which I'm glad that's the one they reviewed because this model is available for $219 right now. And it's one of the cheapest models out there for the 1660, but it provides amazing performance for its price. And it's actually one of our featured deals this evening. So we'll get to that in just a little bit.
So honestly, it's a good part. Regardless of model, regardless of review, it basically sips power. Under most gaming loads, it'll boost itself up to 1.9 gigahertz and stay there and be very cool while doing it.
Right. I've got up here on the screen the official specifications from NVIDIA, and this is from a non-text article. So in particular, notice you have a reduction in CUDA cores versus the 1660 Ti. The 1660 Ti uses the full GPU die for the TU116 GPU at 1,536 CUDA cores. Whereas the 1660 loses two of those SMs, those shading multithreaders, or those SM units, excuse me.
But if you're looking at a CUDA core comparison, it's less than 10%.
Right. It has, I believe it's 8% in total less. But the key thing to notice is the difference in price.
Yeah, that's huge.
The 1660 Ti is a $280 part, whereas the 1660 starts at $220. And $60 may not seem that huge a gap when you think about, the RTX 2060 being at $350 and then the, RTX 2070 at $500.
Well, $500 for bargain basement.
Right.
They're normally around $600.
So that $60 may not seem that big a gap, but remember, this is the mid-range.
Yeah.
And in the mid-range, the difference of $20 to $30 can be a big deal.
Well, the biggest difference, honestly, between the 1660 and the 1660 Ti is in the memory. So the Ti uses DDR6, clocked higher, and so the overall memory bandwidth is better on the 1660 Ti, and that's really the biggest difference when it comes to performance. They're the same power draw. And from what I understand, if you overclock the 1660 and you don't mind tuning it, it'll perform at 1660 Ti levels or just slightly below. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's a really good value at $220. And it seems like pretty much all of the 1660 Ti's at launch perform pretty much the same in every aspect: power draw, cooling, overclocking capability. It's a good part. The only thing I disagree with is the use of six gigs of memory, which for right now it's fine, but a year or two down the line, who knows what that's going to be like. But honestly, if you're gaming at 1440p you're probably not going to get a 1660 or even a 1660 Ti. You know what I mean?
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, the 1660 Ti does provide a solid entry-level 1440 experience.
Mm-hmm.
But let's face it, these are 1080p cards, or at least that's the intention.
Yeah, and at 1080p, you're going to be more than fine. These cards are going to give you a couple of years of 1080p ultra performance at high frame rates. So,
and in a non-text testing, they found that the 1660 performs roughly 28% better on average than the GTX 1063 gig that it nominally replaces.
oh, the 3 gig.
And
that's like why? Even 3 years ago, why?
And it's roughly 21% faster than the 6 gig variant of the GTX 1060. And here's the thing. The GTX 1660 is only 14% slower than the 1660 Ti while costing 20% less.
Yeah.
Which, of course, makes it a better value per dollar.
I gotta say, I was really surprised when I saw the price point. I was expecting like $250 or $260, but no, it's very impressive. This is the first card I can wholeheartedly recommend. It's the only one.
And to kind of illustrate the difference, I'm going over to TechSpot here because I like the way they display their graphs. It makes it nice and easy to read.
Mm-hmm.
So this is their graphs. This is their Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Notice how much better the 1660 does in this particular title. Of course, this is an NVIDIA title that the Turing architecture can take full advantage of. It's less so in more neutral titles like Forza Horizon 4. Notice it's just trading blows with the RX 590 here.
Mm-hmm.
Same in Just Cause 4 and in Resident Evil 2. We see some weirdness in Hitman 2, but they noted in the video review over on Hardware Unboxed, that Hitman 2 is a bit of an odd game in that it actually regresses in some ways from the first Hitman, or the first modern Hitman game, particularly with Radeon GPUs, and they're not really sure why. So take that result with a grain of salt.
It's interesting.
Of course, you have to do Fortnite because Fortnite. Metro Exodus is an interesting one to me. I've been playing through Metro Exodus myself, streaming here for CrossForge on our Twitch channel. And on the Radeon GPUs, I've generally had a good experience with my RX 480, which is clocked similarly to the RX 580 they use here. But I will admit that at times I do run into some stutters, and I think that's probably due to the fact that it is an NVIDIA optimized title. And the fact that I do see the occasional screen tearing unless I enable VSync.
Which is a bit of a performance hit sometimes.
Right. So your mileage may vary, but the GTX 1660 is a solid 1080p card for $220. Now, yes, you can still find the RX 580 8GB at prices between $170 and $190, which makes the price to performance comparison, slightly less obvious. But for the first time, we have an NVIDIA Turing card that provides similar dollar per frame performance to the Polaris lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Now, technically, from a dollar per frame perspective, the RX 570 is still king there. But the GTX 1660, although it costs about $100 more, or $70 to $100 more, depending on the sale, it also provides about 60% greater performance. So,
yeah, I mean, honestly, if someone came to me and said, "I've got $700 or $800 to burn, what do you recommend?" I'd have to give the 1660 the recommendation. Where yesterday it would have been the RX 580, today it's going to be the 1660. Even though it's more expensive, you can easily move things around in a budget to accommodate for that. So I've got to give the 1660 a recommendation.
The only reason why I might not do that for a build is if the person is interested in any of the 3 games that are offered. Remember, you can get 2 free games out of 3 with the RX 580.
And that's fair. That's fair because the 580 is still a good part.
Oh, yes. It's an excellent part at 1080p. Like I said, I run an RX 480 myself. The RX 580 is basically an overclocked version of that. The RX 590 is basically a super overclocked version of that on a smaller process node. And, if you're interested in The Division 2, Resident Evil 2, Devil May Cry 5, if you're interested in any of those games, then the RX 580, although it provides not as much performance as the 1660, might be a better value for you right now.
Right.
That said, that brings us to our hardware deals section that we have every week. And like I said, I'm going to lead off with, there is a deal already on Newegg for the EVGA GeForce GTX 1660 XC gaming card. This is the one that AnonTech reviewed, which is part of the reason why I wanted to show their review and their numbers. So let me pull up the deal. So this is the deal from Newegg. The EVGA GeForce GTX 1660 XC gaming. Of course, we've already talked about all the specs. Boost clock, 1830 megahertz, 6 gigs of GDDR5 VRAM. It's $229. It's on sale for the next week at $229. And it is a $10 rebate card on it, so you can get it for $219.99. Plus, if you check this offer right here, you can get a free copy of the game Grip plus an exclusive EVGA vehicle skin in the game.
Nice.
So, there you go.
Before we started the show, I could have swore I saw one model of the 590 for $220 or $230, but I don't see that anymore. Okay.
I think that was a daily deal, and it may be over, or it may be out of stock. So,
yeah. I don't know why the cheapest models are $239. I just don't see.
Yeah, at that price point, that does kind of put it in the same realm as the 1660, but at least with the RX 590, you can make the argument that if you want those 3 games I mentioned, because the RX 590 does come with all 3 games, if you want The Division 2, Devil May Cry 5, and Resident Evil 2, then okay, the RX 590 might be a better deal for you.
Well, not only that, but then you get the bigger frame buffer and the fact that the 590 is easier to tune than the 1660, but still, I mean, performance is pretty much neck and neck.
So, of course, the big difference is that the RX 590 does use almost twice as much power at 1660.
That's true.
So, if you're wanting a little gaming machine that sips power, yeah, the RX 590 is not what you're looking for.
Right.
So again, that classic statement of fit to purpose.
Fit to purpose. Sounds like it belongs on a t-shirt.
But as I was saying, the RX 590 is a solid pick if you want those 3 games. I mean, in a sense, if you value each of those games at $50 a piece, that means you're basically getting the card at that $239 price point for $80.
Yeah, but still, you have to shell out the money.
Yeah.
Even though you get the free games, I still couldn't recommend it at 239, man. It's got to be less than that. It's got to be 210 or 200.
And that's fair.
You know.
Well, speaking of better prices, if you are interested in getting a Radeon card, I know we've been saying it for weeks and weeks, but it's still true. The RX 570 is the steal of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And we have yet another one this week. This time from Newegg, it is the Power Color Red Dragon RX 570, 4GB model, comes with 2 free games for $130. No mail-in rebate you have to fill out. No tricky promo deal you have to do. No, it's just straight up $130.
It is a nice looking card though. It has a nice little back plate. 2-fan cooler.
Yeah, let's get the photos pulled up. There's the, well, hold on. Let's just do it this way. So you can see we have, that's what the bottom of the card looks like with the fans. There's the back plate. As you can tell, purely decorative. But yeah, it's a solid 2-fan cooler. So,
man, that's a steal at that price, even though it's just the 4 gig variant.
$130, 4 gig, the RX 570 4GB. This will play basically any game you want at 1080p, medium to high settings. And it comes with 2 free games. Again, from that same set of 3 I keep coming back to, you choose any 2 between The Division 2, Resident Evil 2, and Devil May Cry 5.
Pretty solid.
And I understand not everyone has that kind of money to put down on stuff. Maybe you just want to treat yourself to something more direct. This is the Acer Nitro Gaming Keyboard. It is $23.99, $24 from Amazon with Prime. You can get it in 1 to 2 days. It is a solid gaming RGB keyboard.
Well,
yes, for the price.
Yeah, I mean, for $24, you're basically getting a nice looking RGB keyboard. So
no, it does not have mechanical switches. And yes, you're going to pay more for a mechanical. But if you just need an RGB keyboard for your gaming with a few macro keys and you want it to have a 10-key number pad, here you go. $24. Have at it. It does come with 6 different backlight modes and with 3 different RGB zones. So you can customize the backlighting on the keys. If I can enunciate correctly this evening.
Enunciate.
And of course, for $24, if you need a keyboard and you want something more than, one of the dime a dozen membrane keyboards that's provided from your OEM, there you go.
Membrane. That's such a naughty word. That sounds like I can't say it. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our topics. And so, if you've enjoyed everything you've seen here, then, of course, you can always check out all our other TechForge videos in the TechForge playlist. You can also check out our other content here on CrossForge Gaming. If you want to see us live, you can check out our CrossForge Gaming Twitch channel, where we stream 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. You can also check us out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Discord. Links to all those will be down in the description.
Really?
And with that, Jason, do you have anything else to add this evening?
No. You said it all, Ned.
Well, in that case, thank you for watching. I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you, and forge on.